Hello and welcome to this week's episode of QTV. Wow, have we got a great program coming up.
We'll be chatting to Grace and Jacey, two queer young emerging artists and great musicians.
Then we'll head down the highway to join all the festivities and the fun of the Geelong Rainbow Festival.
Andrea Waling from La Trobe University discusses why Q+ young people don't always use the emergency services.
Then we go back in time to meet the wonderful Max de Barrie, who was put in jail for kissing the state governor at a kissing booth for charity.
Sounds fabulous.
Is it time to turn back the clocks? Can I trade in my jumpers and winter socks? My name's Grace Candellan. I was born in Foster in Victoria.
My name's Jacey Ashton. I was born in Hornsby in New South
I
Wales.
crave the heat, I crave the sun, I crave the feeling when the year is done. I've been playing guitar since I was about 14 and I've always sung as well. But I play bass in a band with Jacey called Black Bats.
From a young age, I'd kind of make my own drumsticks, and I just always kind of listen to video hits and music and just get really into the drums and the rhythm. I like building things a lot as well, so I build drum kits and guitar pedals as well, actually. Yeah, I made this little pedal, and it worked out pretty well after about 3 or 4 turns. I came out super young, like I basically walked out of the womb and I was like, all right, I'm ready. Like initially my mum was like, Jacey, are you gay? And I was like, no, are you gay, mum? What a weird question to ask. And then like a week later I was like, yeah, mum, I'm gay. Like I had posters of like Ellen DeGeneres and like the L Word and I don't know.
Like I used to date men for a long time and I started a band called Wet Lips and we were like a 3-piece punk band. And we started when we were 19. We just like were watching other like male punk bands and we were like, we can do that, we want to do that. So we started a band and started playing gigs, and like I was definitely searching for the approval of my male peers in that punk scene. Like I just wanted someone to be like, to feel as legitimate as those male punk bands. But then whenever we did play with those male punk bands who were really cool, we would just get treated like shit, and they would say things to us like, hey dudettes, or hey girl dudes, fun show. We would like walk into venues and we would just be like so ready for someone to say something sexist. Just like we're gonna fuck you up.
Yeah.
Yeah. We would walk around and feel like a gang. And in hindsight, like our band was super, super queer. You know, I feel like there's a pretty clear idea of how like society wants you to behave if you're a woman. A lot of women who are advocating for change in the music industry at the moment are coming from a very straight perspective. The perspective that I definitely had when I was playing in Wet Lips when we first started. I don't think having like someone who's queer in a band necessarily makes it
A queer band.
music. Black Bats
Yeah.
is probably not queer music
Yeah.
at all. By us playing in the band, it's
Queer music.
queer. You know, there are some bands that have no one who's gay in them.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
their music is gay.
Like Kylie.
Like Kylie,
Yeah.
like Kylie.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Kylie's gay because her... Oh, sorry. It's, oh my god, I'm revealing
Really
the
bad.
industry secrets.
Kylie's
Kylie Minogue's gay. We got together like 3 days before the postal survey went into place. So we I definitely felt all of a sudden like very visibly queer.
It was the first time that I was like, oh my god, this applies to me. Like this definitely applies to me. And now I can see like why everybody's kind of been up in arms about it.
Like Jacey was in hospital for a few days last year.
Oh yeah.
Often, or a couple of times in a row, the nurses would walk in and go, "Are you sisters? You look
Yeah.
so similar." And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, we have the same haircut. like my first band, Wet Lips, we started playing together and at a time when other friends were starting to play in bands. And at the time I was volunteering in community radio, and I also was doing a bit of work like booking venues. So I'd ask a venue if I could book a night there. And then from there we just kept on kind of like booking gigs and got to a point where we wanted to record an EP. So we did that with a producer and then released it ourselves. All of those artists nowadays are doing so much admin as well as playing music, which sucks, but the upside is that you have much more control over like your money and what you want to do and the gigs you play and how you present yourself. Like Joan Jett, you know, she's never gone, I'm a gay woman, I better go and argue for some space. I'm fighting, can't you tell? Oh yeah, I'm doing great.
But then like when I like meeting Grace, she was so like, no, do you know about this? Men are doing these things. Like, this is crazy. And I was like, so don't hang out with them.
We'd like slept together like 3 times and we were walking down the street
holding out. we met, we were like, we're together, that's
we
it.
were like, we're going out.
Just like every lesbian. But I think like I have heaps of respect for Grace. She's an amazing person and artist, and yeah, she's inspiring to be around, which is good. And she does admin, and I hate that. And her phone's always charged, so call her anytime you ever need me. So yeah, and I do the stuff.
Thanks, baby.
Time for me is this easy for you. Is this all I need to you?
I think queer people saying this is queer music makes music queer.
I'm still gonna be me, and I'll, you know, tell weird stories and do whatever I do, you know,
And be comfortable with yourself.
Yeah.
Was it easy for you to get me out of your head?
What a great couple of characters those girls are, and such fabulous musicians.
And gorgeous.
They are indeed. Now we're going to move on to look at the Geelong Rainbow Festival, another colourful episode.
Geelong Rainbow Inc. We are the host of the 2019 Geelong Rainbow Festival. So this is our second year. First year we had entertainers, we had the piano bar, and it's just grown this year. We've got stalls, we've got food bands, we've got Pride March. So yeah, bigger and better this year.
LGBTI health organisation based in Melbourne and in Bendigo, and we do lots of campaigns around sexual health, well-being, we have counselling.
And Energy Australia. So I think Energy Australia might be the first one to have a bunch of people here. So
really hoping that there will be enough people to make a really big loud noise.
Well, wait. Socialist Alliance.
Hi, I'm Aaron from Piano Bar. We're proud to be Geelong's all-inclusive venue where everyone's welcome, and we're so proud to be one of the principal partners.
Great that there's another regional Pride Festival.
And yeah, I think it's in its second year now, Tess.
Absolutely, yeah. And the numbers were just huge.
Growing fast.
Mm. Next, Dr. Andrea Waling talks to Joy 94.9's Saturday Magazine. Let's take a look.
Why do we need to investigate the experience of crisis for LGBTI people? How is it different from non-LGBTI people?
The history of discrimination that LGBTI people experience would mean that it'd be when they're experiencing a mental health crisis or a personal crisis that they're going through additional concerns. And so, the study was really looking at why they may or may not use a crisis support service during that time. And we found that, in fact, even though there are very high rates of mental health distress and personal distress amongst the population, over 71% of our sample would choose not to use a service at that time period and instead choose to either see a doctor or a psychologist or actually just engage in a self-coping mechanism instead.
So is that because they think that they will be discriminated against, or is it because they've actually had some experience of actual discrimination?
It's actually that fear of the anticipation of discrimination. So we found that because most of our sample didn't actually use a crisis support service, they didn't have a direct experience of discrimination, but they had experienced discrimination in other health services or in other kinds of services, and so that was informing their choice to not use a mainstream service.
So what do we need to do as a society and these providers to bring this number down? So at least we've got parity.
Yeah, the first thing is that it's already happening. QLife, which is the only nationally service to do that work, is doing that work, and they're doing an amazing job with the limited amount of resources that they have. The one thing I could say is they need more resources to continue that work. They need more money to be able to spread much more awareness of the availability of what they have and to be able to help more people. In terms of mainstream services, one of the key things that we're recommending that they do is we actually recommending them to actually engage with LGBTI orgs in health and well-being, to start developing training and programs to help their counselors and their crisis support workers in working with the population, but also to demonstrate that they are allies to the community and that they are actually invested in ensuring that those services are safe. A lot of members of the community, if they don't see a mainstream service doing that kind of work, if they don't see that they're actually investing or engaging or trying to make their service safe for them, they're just not going to use it. And because because they don't want to go through that discrimination again.
84% of LGBTI people, that's most LGBTI people believe that many parts of Australia are unsafe. How are we going to turn that around?
I think the community is already doing as much as it possibly can to address those issues. In terms of mainstream community, I mean, it's really about the mainstream community really working with the LGBT community, working to create safer spaces. I think some of that's starting to happen with things like Rainbow Tick, and we're seeing more things like the government's got national plans, for example, for LGBTI and aged care.
Yes.
That's really, really significant and important, but there's still so much that needs to be done.
But it goes to the absolute nub of what you're talking about as well. So if we are always feeling in fear of many parts of the country, moving into many parts of the country, how are we going to deal with crises?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely it. And that's where I think services like Q Life are really trying to bridge that gap. But outside of that, I mean, what we're hoping to do with Lifeline, if we can get funding, is we actually want to go into all of their training centres. So Lifeline's got call centres across Australia, and what we want to do is actually go into those centres and work with the crisis support counsellors.
Who's we, by the way?
Myself and other members of my research team were trying to get funding to develop a research project that includes training with these crisis support workers. So to look at what are their gaps in training, what do they need to be able to actually support the LGBTI community, and then actually establishing training and doing evaluations of that training to make sure that it's effective. This is a very long-term plan. It's a massive study that we're trying to pull together. So that's what we're trying to do in the kind of small scheme of things. But in terms of that big question, I'm just not sure.
Switchboard in Victoria has lost some funding, particularly around aged members of our community, and
from the federal government.
From the federal government, and some funding, or not that funding, but other funding went to an organisation in Queensland that wasn't really doing it, but is.
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Hey, there's a pattern of this with the feds, Macca.
Yeah.
They've now done it to a number. Remember they did it to Food Bank?
Yes. Yeah. So, a number of us are working on that behind the scenes to try and get that back. But, at the end of the day, if we assume, let's be pessimistic and say 5% of the Australian community is LGBTIQ.
But it's not. It's 11.
No, it's 10
But it's 11. Let's be honest about it.
Okay. And, in terms of funding for all sorts of services for our communities, right, and let's assume we all pay similar rates of tax, we're all in similar income brackets, our community, right, receives funding for services, specific services, at about 3%.
Well, if that.
No, at about 3% of other communities. So there's a long way to go, and it's not surprising that, people do feel a bit in crisis. But, everyone needs to remember you're not alone. There is always someone that you can reach out and talk to. But at the end of the day, people always say, oh, yes, it's about funding, it's about resources. No, it's actually about equity. We need to receive a share of funding that is commensurate with the number of us in the community. And then if it's not sufficient because we're being disadvantaged by particular conditions, okay, increase it. But we need to get parity in funding, not a few crumbs that have fallen off the table that the dog forgot to lick up, because that's what's happening at the moment.
Isn't it good to see that Saturday Magazine always seems to get some really interesting interviews, and also something as important as using those emergency services for LGBTI people?
Absolutely.
So what's next, Tess?
Well, next up, we have our moment in time where we meet the wonderful Max de Barrie.
Max de Barrie was a prominent figure in Melbourne's camp scene from the 1940s onwards. In his working life, he was a wharfie, about as blokey a job as there was. But at work, he was popular and respected, and when his workmates sent him up, it was usually pretty good-natured. And they were quick to defend him against anyone who tried to have a go at him. In real life, he was a drag queen of the most flamboyant kind, described as a notorious figure, or as we might say, a leader in the emerging camp world. Like many of the best-known camp figures of the time, Max delighted in shocking people. His most famous exploit was the year he sold kisses at the Arts Ball, a major charity event. He was in full drag, performing as the film star Heather Page. And amongst those who paid for and got a kiss was the unsuspecting Governor of Victoria, whose house we're standing outside right now. On another occasion, he invited Bubbles LaRue, a prominent Sydney drag queen, to a party. When Bubbles knocked on the door the next night, in full drag as was required, it turned out she was at the home of the Archbishop of Melbourne, where there was in fact no drag party going on. Max's notoriety and his shenanigans caught the eye of Truth newspaper, a notorious scandal sheet of the day, and of the police. This resulted in a cosy little relationship in which police harassment was reported in Truth, which then created a scandal which the police had to respond to. There was a cycle of arrests and scandalous reports through the 1950s. After all, a man wearing a woman's clothes in public could be arrested because they were committing an offence under the Vagrancy Act. Max was jailed for this, wearing women's clothing, as early as the late 1940s when he was aged about 20. After the kisses for the governor story started to circulate, again courtesy of Truth, police really went after him. At one point they raided a private party and arrested Max and the young Noel Tovey, both of whom were imprisoned. And yet in 1970 Max agreed to appear in a documentary on Australian sex called The Naked Bunyip. He was the only homosexual the producer could find who was prepared to appear and speak. He presented a very positive take on homosexual life, talking of love and romance, but also of the pleasures of illicit sex. He was quite confident in countering the opinions of police and psychiatrists with his own experience.
What a fascinating character he must have been, Max de Barrie. At one minute he was working on the docks and then he was in a dress. Amazing. But that's it for this week's QTV show. We had a great look at Jacey and Gracie, some wonderful musicians forging their way in the world. We also looked at the colourful Rainbow Geelong Festival that's in its second year. We then finally take a look at Andrea Waling, talking about the need for Q+ communities to use the emergency services and not feel scared. And finally that wonderful glimpse at Max de Barrie, especially getting kissed by the governor in his kissing booth. But thank you for joining Tess and myself. We'll be back again next time for some more QTV.